Good morning. I almost said evening, but good morning to all of you. So glad that you've chosen to be with us this morning, and also thank all our great speakers. Today's topic is one that is probably at the forefront, and I think we'll probably see more and more people talking about this as we move throughout the upcoming year. Education was definitely one of the areas I think that was hardest hit. A lot of people talked about the nurses and the first responders and all that. But to me, a lot of people didn't talk about the educators, all the aspects from teachers to principals to staff to social workers, counselors, et cetera, and the impact that COVID was having on them. And so we wanted to dedicate this year to education as far as Bridge Builders goes. And today's topic, of course, is dealing with mental health for educators. This crisis, I think, is still going to linger on. And if you watch the news, the big question still is, how will we return to school? Because everybody's getting vaccinated except for the children, especially the younger ones. So I think educators will still be fighting this battle for several more months. To start things off today, we're going to have Miss Washandra McNeil, CEO of True Life Solutions. She served the community as an agent of change for more than 15 years as a mental health professional, a school social worker, and an entrepreneur. She's the founder of Soaring Sisters, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit that serves adult sexual trauma survivors. And she owns, as I said, True Life Solutions Counseling and Consulting. She's married with 3 awesome children and currently serves as a school social worker within the Tuscaloosa City school system. In both her professional and personal life, she aims to empower people to become the best expression of who they are created to be. And today she's going to speak with us regarding recognizing and resiliently responding to change. I'll turn it over to you, Ms. McNeil.
Awesome. Look, happy Tuesday. Thank you all for this invitation and just the opportunity to share in such a great space. I tell you, it's really a blessing to be able to see faces, especially familiar faces and names, like in the space. And so that's really a good thing. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get ready to just get started rocking and rolling. Mr. Houston, thank you for that wonderful introduction and for getting the words right, like the name and all those stuff. Hats off to you for that, because a lot of times people really mess that name up. But I really appreciate you helping or going ahead and doing that. All right, and so I'm trying to get my screen going, but it's having a little trouble with this top piece. Just kind of giving me a chance to share it. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm trying to get my screen, but it's not allowing me to go forward, but just moving along. I'm Washandra McNeil, and as he said, I've had the capacity to serve in so many different spaces, especially as it pertains to mental health and just how we do things. As we know that this past year has really been a challenge for so many of us, and it has impacted people in so many different ways. What I'll do is I want to really get this going, but it's not allowing me. I'm sorry, you all. What I want to do is just talking about how we can recognize and resiliently respond to the changes, because as we know, with the COVID-19 pandemic and just everything that has gone on, it has really caused all of us to have to kind of rethink and look at ways to really get things going and to deal with changes that, many of us would not have even expected that we would have to encounter or deal with. And so as we look at it, there are so many ways that we have to adapt to change on a day-to-day basis. All right, and so my screen is not allowing me to share, so I'm going to go
Ms. McNeil, do you want me to share from my end? If you unshare, yeah, I can share for you.
No problem. Do next slide, and I'll just let you know when to transition.
Absolutely, we can make that work.
More than one way to change, even in the moment.
Yes, it's okay. If you would just unshare, and then I'll share mine.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Right. Not a problem. So as we look at it, I want to talk mental health And I'm so glad that they've decided to focus on, especially when it comes to the aspect of educators, because the truth is there has been so much change that educators have had to experience as a result of the pandemic that is actually in effect now. So let's talk mental health as we get started. As we look at it, when we think about mental health, what really stood out to me as I was looking at some of the stats and just, the things that have been outlined. It's just the frequency or the prevalence of certain diagnoses. And I was thinking about that in regards to how we are currently in this pandemic and how people who are already experiencing different mental health conditions may even be more greatly impacted due to the changes that we're having to face now. And so, it's really important for us to know a few things. And so I'm not real big on sharing a whole lot of stats, but I think for the purpose of this presentation, it's going to be really important for me to put a few things just out there. And so as we look at mental health and just some of the facts that we know when it comes to mental health, what we have to know is that 1 in 5 adults experience mental health every year. But aside from that, even children between the ages of 6 and 17, 1 in 6 youth also experience mental health issues. A lot of times people will say children don't have anything to worry about but being kids. They don't really have any issues. But that's not necessarily true. The truth is, just as well as adults can be impacted with mental health conditions, so too can children be impacted when it comes to their mental health. With suicide being the second leading cause of death, it is so important that we discuss and talk about something that so many times stigmatizes individuals and causes them to think, hey, I can't really say anything about the things that I experience because guess what? People may look at me differently. People may view me in another way. But we have to know that mental health is something that does not discriminate. It doesn't care what part of town we're from. It doesn't care what our professional experience is. It doesn't care what our religious affiliations are. When it comes down to it, mental health is something that we really have to address and have to deal with as we move forward and we prepare to bounce back and respond to change. And so when it comes to mental health conditions, the top 3 that I want to point out or talk a little bit about are anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so when we think about those, according to NAMI, anxiety is number 1, depression is number 2, and PTSD is the 3rd leading mental health condition that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so when I was thinking about that in regards to us having to bounce back and deal with the changes that we've experienced as a result of the pandemic, I was thinking, wow, everything considering those top 3 mental health conditions, all of those can be further exacerbated by the changes that so many individuals are having to face now dealing with this global health pandemic. If you think about it, we can recall several things possibly during this past year that has made anybody or any of us become a little bit anxious or to feel a little bit down when we cannot engage or interact with people the way that we may be accustomed to it. Not to mention the trauma associated with us having to have our day-to-day lives disrupted in a way that we have never, ever seen before. And so if there was ever a time that we need to talk about mental health, now is actually that time. Next slide, please. All right, and so as we look at the big picture, here's just a flashback. Now, I don't want anybody to get triggered from this. When we see the mask and all those things, don't start twitching because I know sometimes, these masks can really make me feel some type of way. I said, even after this is over, I'm going to keep one just so I can hold on to it and recall the days of when we had to go through this time. But these are some of the big changes that we had to experience during the global health pandemic. And so if there was ever a time where we needed to talk about ways to truly bounce back, now is that time. We got to talk about ways to bounce back because the truth is we cannot undo what has already been done. We have to just kind of live with the changes that are in place and find healthy ways to maintain our mental health as educators as we navigate these times. Because guess what? Life goes on. The world goes on. We have to get back to business. But the truth is we have to do it in a way where it's healthy for all of us. And so as we were looking at it, I was thinking that, hey, we got to talk bounce back. So let's talk resilience. Next slide, please. As we look at or as we think about the word resilience, I put 4 pictures up here because anybody who knows me knows that I like a little bit of interaction. And so what I'm going to ask our participants to do at this time is to look at these 4 pictures on the screen And if you will, just using the chat box, type in which picture best represents resilience to you. And I just want to see what some of the feedback is. And so at our top left, we have this beautiful purple flower that's kind of growing up out of the crack, because guess what? If there was ever a time that we've needed to grow in a really dry place, this is that time. All right, at our top right, we also see a strong egg that's kind of holding up this big boulder on top of it. Tell us which image represents resilience when you think about it. Now, this one on the bottom left is a bull rider. I don't know about any of you all, but I have never ridden a bull. But when I think about bouncing back, I think a bull rider definitely has to know how to bounce back and to adjust, considering some things. And the fourth picture down at the bottom right is just this big old rubber ball. And so I want to see what represents, okay, somebody said all four pictures. All right, choose one, choose one. Any other input? The bull rider, we see the flower, we see the flower. All right, we see the rock and the egg and the strength under pressure. I love that. Thank you, Bishop Benton, for that. All right, and so as we look at it, these are many different pictures that represent resilience. The rubber bands, okay, the ball, thank you. What I will say is, though, somebody may say, well, Ms. McNeil, you're asking us what represents resilience to us, but which picture did you choose? All right, and so I guess I'll go ahead and disclose which one I chose. All of them are a portrait of resilience, but when it comes down to me, I went with the egg, and I'm simply going to choose that one because there's nothing like strength and a snack in the same place. And so, so I said, let's get it. All right. And so that's the one that I chose when it came to resilience, because guess what? We're in times now, y'all, where we have to learn how to grow in dry places, or really to withstand under so much pressure. It's not easy, but the truth is resilience is something that we can develop if we'll only invest some time into it. Next slide, please. All right, and so as educators considering mental health, we have to choose, like, moving forward, what we're going to choose to see and not see, because the truth is our lives have been disrupted or changed in ways that we never thought imaginable. But as we move forward and as we keep our mental health in sight, we have to stay alert and aware so that we can understand what kind of things are normal or abnormal when it comes to us operating our mental functioning. And guess what? That takes self-awareness. Sometimes that takes a social circle where people will be honest with us about things that they may recognize that may not necessarily be the way that it would generally run. And so when it comes down to it, it is important for us as we move forward and as we take steps to bounce back in a healthy way that we maintain a good awareness of what is healthy and unhealthy or abnormal and normal behaviors for ourselves and even for some people around us sometimes. All right, and so we have to keep some things in mind. And so we know that when it comes down to it, fear, worry, anxiety, those are some things that, guess what, anybody can experience. But the truth is, it's not just about experiencing certain feelings, but we have to keep in mind the frequency at which we experience those things. And so some things that we want to keep in mind as educators is the frequency. How long has this been going on? How big of a change is this from what I would usually be? Those are things that we have to keep in mind, because when it comes to looking at those changes or those behaviors that we may want to be aware of, we not only need to look at behaviors, but we need to keep an eye on our mood, just how those things may fluctuate. Yeah, there are some things that may cause our moods to fluctuate some. For instance, if I'm missing lunch, guess what? I might not be as chipper as I would normally be. But the truth is, we have to recognize those long-term, far-reaching kind of mood fluctuations that may be really extreme. Also, when it comes to us having good, clear boundaries with things that we engage in, those are things that we need to be aware of from a mental health perspective, because sometimes it's very easy, and I can agree, it's very easy for things to get out of whack. Like when it comes to things that we may consume or things that we may do to relax, or to kind of take the edge off. We have to be careful about how we engage in certain things and keep some good, clear boundaries so that those things don't negatively impact our mental health. Also, our thought patterns, what I was thinking about with that one is that when it comes down to it and us bouncing back in a healthy way, fear is not a bad thing. We all experience fear at some point. I don't care who we are. But what we have to do is make sure that that fear is not an overwhelming fear that is getting in the way of us performing the task that we need to do. So for instance, if my fear is causing me not to want to be able to sleep or not to be able to engage in activities that I would normally do, that's something I need to address from a mental health perspective, because guess what? There's some work to be done there, because feelings were not meant to dictate or determine how we choose to engage or not engage in certain things. It's just an indicator. It should not be driving the vehicle. And so we have to keep those things in mind. Also, when it comes to our patterns of relationships, we have to just keep a gauge on it and be very self-aware when it comes to how we interact, because it is so easy to withdraw and to kind of go back into a shell and not really interact with people the way that we once did. And that can negatively impact our mental health, because the truth is we were not created to live in isolation. We were created as relational beings. And so we have to keep those things in mind. Next slide, please. All right, and so leading the way, I put this picture on here because as I think about recognizing and resiliently responding to change, a few years ago, I took swimming lessons, and the guy that was leading the class, he was telling me, he was saying, hey, when you're swimming, be mindful of where the top of your head is, because wherever the top of your head is, that's the direction you're going to go in. And so if you tuck your head down, you're going to go down to the bottom of the pool. But if you swim with your head directly forward, you're going to go straight across. I want to encourage us as we look at resiliently responding to the changes that we've had to experience, to be mindful of our head space and our perspective. Because wherever our head is, that's where everything else will follow. That's where everything else will go when it comes down to it. And so we have to be very, very mindful of the way that we think about and view things. One thing that I was thinking about when it comes to our view and just our head space and the power perspective is that we have to recognize that even as we move forward, that guess what? More changes will come. We can also do that by allowing grace for the race, not only for ourselves, but even for other people, because guess what? We're not going to get everything right as we move forward and we learn to do this in a new way. And so we have to keep those things in mind. The final thing I wanted to point out, just as we think about the power perspective and the importance of us leading and just being in control of our head space, what I wanted to talk about is that it's important for us to really focus in on the things that we that we have, that we can really tap into and really utilize, because sometimes just the mere fact that we see ourselves as having some inadequacies or not being able to do things the way we would normally do, it can increase our anxiety levels. So let us as a people not focus on what is lacking, but what we are packing. We have resources, we have people, we have knowledge, we have things that we can utilize to help us to navigate these changes that we do in a resilient way. And so that's very important. Next slide, please. All right, and so the one of the last things I wanted to do is just to point out that let us not forget to hold on and to never lose hope. We have to be optimistic people with expectations and desires and ambitions, and not to lose those things in the face of adversity or change, because the truth is the last thing we need to do is to let go and give up just because there's change on the scene. Let us hold on to our hope. And the reason I put that hope is a rope, because guess what? There are times when we feel really depleted because we've been faced with so much adversity and change. All right, so just a few ways, and you can feel free to take a picture of this slide as we talk or get ready to wrap up my portion. These are a few things that can be utilized to tap into different resources that may be beneficial within the Tuscaloosa City Schools District. I just want to highlight that we have social workers assigned, master's level mental health professionals assigned to each and every school in the district. And so if there are needs that are in place for students, or sometimes even as colleagues, if we need to know how to get connected to services, reach out to those that are in that space. Also, I listed the information for Soaring Sisters because so many people who have that trauma history, especially sexual trauma, can deal with mental health issues. And so we want people to know how to get connected to services. And last but not least, I included the information or the contact information for Via True Life Solutions. We provide counseling services for individuals, couples, or families. We serve adults and children. And so please let us take steps to help ourselves or others that we know get connected to the mental health services that they need. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for Ms. McNeil for your presentation. You're now one of my new favorite speakers. You did an awesome job, and we want to make sure that we allow opportunity for our guests and to ask you any questions. So at this time, does anyone have any questions or comments? If you do, please put them in chat, and we'll do that. And while you're typing in those questions, I'll check with Ms. Marissa to see if we have any questions or comments. Ms. McNeil, you mentioned several things. By the way, the flower was mine because it showed growth through resilient, hard times. I mean, it showed growth in new life, so I like that one. But you mentioned something about being alert and aware. And that's two different things. Kind of talk to us when the difference between being alert and aware, because sometimes people think it's the same thing.
Yes, sir. When I think of awareness, that's just from an educational standpoint where we have to be educated, first of all, to know like what are the things that we have to look or that we should look for. And I think these types of events or platforms provide opportunities for people to get information so that they can know to recognize things like, hey, I need to be aware and know that any major changes that are lasting for 2 weeks or more, that's something I may need to be concerned about. But when it comes to being alert, that's just that red light indicator to let us know, like, hey, something is happening now. And so that's the difference that I think about when I think about those two words, Mr. Houston.
All right. If anyone, like I said, if you have any questions or comments at this time, you can type them in. If you have questions later on, as we go through the other presenters, you can type those questions in and we'll come back and circle back around at the end. You said behavior versus mood. There's a lot you said in there, but behavior versus mood and being aware of those two. Could you expound on what you meant by that?
Yes, sir. When we think about behavior, that can be anything from our sleeping patterns to our eating patterns, to the way that we engage with people or how we may choose to avoid certain things because there's an overwhelming fear about it. Our mood deals with just how we feel internally. That may be those anxious feelings. Or those depressed feelings. And so mood, anger outbursts, irritability, those things would fall into that mood category. And so those are changes that we need to kind of be aware of so that we can kind of distinguish what's normal versus abnormal. One thing I will say, Mr. Houston, when it comes to recognizing those changes, I'm not saying that every time that we see a change, it means that we need to seek out the services of a mental health professional. But what I will say is if those changes are lasting for a prolonged period of time, there's definitely a need to get connected to services or to even, first of all, take the first step to follow up with a primary care physician. Because the truth is, sometimes if we have not had a physical or our levels may be off, that can affect our mental functioning. And so a good first stop would just to be make sure we're keeping up those primary care appointments. If our levels and things like that are good and we recognize those changes are going on for 2 or more weeks, it may require us to kind of get services elsewhere.
One last question for you, Ms. McNeil, as we wrap up. You mentioned boundaries and identifying those boundaries. And Bill and I talked quite a bit during COVID about the new normal and how people tend to try to always go back to what it was before. How do we, as educators and our individuals, how do we handle the new normal in establishing those new boundaries?
Okay. And so as we think about just establishing new boundaries or establishing boundaries, considering the circumstances that we may work under now, I think it's going to be very important for us to know what our priorities are, because it's hard to set boundaries if we don't even know what's important to us. And so one thing that we can do is, for instance, you can create a value tree where you identify, hey, what's my top priorities? That can be 3 to 5 things. And from there, make sure that everything that we do or the practices that we put in place truly speak to the fact that those things are important to us. So for instance, if family time is important to us, we have to set clear boundaries. For instance, maybe having a cutoff time for the cell phone or saying I don't respond to work-related emails after a certain time. And that way we can keep those things separate, because honestly, with the changes that we've experienced, that's one thing I had to learn really quickly. It is so easy for our work life to bleed over into our family life. And guess what? If we're not careful, we won't have balance in those areas, and it can negatively impact not only our functioning, but the function of those that are connected to us. So it's really important to really assess those boundaries and to continually take steps to make sure that we're protecting that space.
You're awesome, Ms. McNeil. We appreciate your time, and I'm sure there may be some questions come up at the end, but thank you so much for your contribution to today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, at this time we'll transition over to Dr. Lombarger, more commonly known as the champion principal with over 20 years of experience as an educator, serving in roles such as teacher, coach, assistant principal, elementary school principal, and most recently as the elementary director of instruction for Huntsville City Schools. He's been a teacher of the year. He has gotten distinguished recognition from the DeKalb County School District, the Boy Scouts, and so many others. And at this time, he's going to encourage us in terms of dealing with the COVID gap. I turn it over to you, Mr. Dr. Lombarger.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, first of all, thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you very briefly. I don't know why you guys put me after Dr. McNeil. I cannot even say anything compared to what she's already shared with you guys. And in addition to the other distraction, my mind is all over the place. And I guess that's why mental illness is a big issue right now, because I gotta be honest, I'm all over the place right now. I'm distracted. I should have had a PowerPoint. So I'm gonna try my best to go ahead and share with you very briefly some things that I find important. So again, let's think about the COVID gap, and I call it the COVID gap. And this is a distance of space that our educators have to make up for. A lot of times, we totally forgot. When I say we, I'm talking about principals, administrators, and leaders. We really totally forgot about the gap that teachers may face. So we seem to think, and I think we thought a year ago that teachers were okay. I know as a principal, when March hit, when March hit, I just expected my teachers to keep teaching as normal. I understood that there was a pandemic, but in my mindset as a leader, I assumed that, hey, we are teaching boys and girls. What's the problem? A lot of things really did not click in my head until months later, until I actually started having conversations with teachers all over Alabama, in Georgia. And they talked to me. There was a teacher from Jefferson County, Miss T. Miss T told me, she said, well, Monty, you're a principal, you don't really understand. And I said, well, break it down for me. What is it about teaching now during a pandemic that's so tough? And then the first thing that came out of her mouth was similar to what Ms. McNeil said. She said, well, it's mental health, it's anxiety, it's depression. And I was like, well, what are you having anxiety about? What are you depressed about? You still have your job. I know many people around who saying they do not have a job, they lost their job, so they have a different type of issues that are going on. But when she broke it down to me, it made a lot of sense. Number one, she said, Monty, there's a pandemic going on. I'm afraid that I may die. That never clicked into my head that the teachers were really afraid that they may lose their lives. And then in addition, she went on to say, she was like, I have children at home. What if I get COVID and I take this home to my family, my husband, my child, my auntie, my elderly parent that I'm taking care of? And it kind of just hit me. I was like, wow, I never even thought about it like that. So those are some things when she started talking about anxiety and depression, the fear, being afraid. And then you have a principal like myself who was really not understanding. We were saying, hey, just go in the trenches and do what you're supposed to do for the boys and girls. So all these things start clicking in my mind. So when she shared that with me, and then she said, hey, not only do I got to keep doing my job, not only do I have to worry about dying from COVID, and then we still have to close the academic gap with our boys and girls, because we already had like a reading gap with our boys and girls that we totally forgot about. So we have like a double gap going on now. So we have that gap with our boys and girls who are struggling with reading from the beginning, and now we have an additional gap where our boys and girls are maybe months behind. So that stressed her out. And she was like, well, you guys are always pushing us to do better and better and make sure we do small groups and making sure we're providing the services for our boys and girls. And she said, how do we do that? I really don't know how to do that during a pandemic. It made me think. And that's why this conversation is so important. We have to understand that the world changed for educators. It's never going to be business as usual again. We have been telling educators to go in front of the classroom teach your standards, work in small groups, build relationships, do high fives. If I was in the school right now, I probably would just have a heart attack if I could not give my boys and girls a hug, if I could not give them a high five and shake their hands. That's what we have been preaching and practicing for 20 years, building those relationships. So we have to change how we do business altogether, which is very stressful. We have to teach behind a shield. We have to teach with a mask on. How can you teach sounds with a mask on? Your sounds are muffled. There's so many different things that our teachers have to deal with now, as far as the spacing in the classroom. All of those different things, they have to change up the way they teach. They have to change up the way they interact. Guess what? I honestly didn't know much about Zoom before the pandemic. I don't think I've had any Zoom meetings before the pandemic. All of our meetings were face-to-face, and we were building relationships. So as soon as the pandemic hit, the teachers, the principals, we all had to learn the Zoom platform. Not only that, parents, we started to have to talk to parents over Zoom. All of these things were different. We distance ourselves. I guess it would be like more like distancing yourself now, instead of having that parent right with you face to face. The teachers had to learn different curriculums, different platforms. They had to use different forms of technology. All of these things were a learning curve to our teachers. So in addition to the pandemic, they had to teach differently, had to follow different sets of rules, and they had to use technology. You would be amazed how many teachers right now have so much anxiety from using technology. It's very difficult for some people. It's a learning curve for some people. So with all of that going on, it increased their anxiety. Every time they see somebody, and I won't just say they, me personally, if I saw you in the mall right now, I'm going to keep my distance. I'm becoming more paranoid. Even as a person of just me personally, I'm more paranoid who I talk to, how close I'm with them. Are they going to give me COVID? Have they had that vaccine? All of these things are in teacher minds. You see what we see now is an increase of teachers who are retiring. If you pay attention to the statistics all over the country, teachers who can retire, they are retiring right now because they're nervous. They're nervous of COVID. They're nervous of their families. There are some teachers now, they would not dare come into education right now because they do not want to expose themselves and expose their families to COVID as well. And as I speak about this very quickly, we cannot talk about one without the other. The teachers are facing depression. The students are facing depression. The teachers have worries. The students have worries. I lump both of them in the same category. It's not one without the other. And they both still need each other. There's an academic gap. There's a socioeconomic gap. I was with a family just the other day, and the family said, I would have never guessed this. She said, we talk about gaps, but she said, but did you know what this has done for me? She said, we have closed the gap in some ways. And I said, ma'am, what do you mean? She said, there was a time when just certain people were homeless. Only certain people had to go to the food bank. She said, we went from making $60,000 a year not worrying about food to now we are standing in the food bank line. See, all of those things are going on with our families, with our teachers, with our students. More students are hungry now. You won't believe this, but there are some teachers who have to have assistance as well because they're taking care of their families as well. So all of these things are playing a role in the depression, in the anxiety. What's next? A pandemic, we have never experienced this before in our lives. So one thing we have to do as leaders, we have to make sure that we provide the resources for our teachers and for our students. That's number one. That's why social workers are extremely important and counselors are extremely important. We have to really pay attention not only to our students, but we have to really pay attention to our teachers as well. We have cases where not only are teachers having anxiety, you have cases where you see the suicide rate is going up a little bit. You see cases now, this is real life information. You see cases now where teachers are snapping. At first, a teacher was able to deal with little Johnny cutting up in the classroom, but now because of the pandemic and the other stresses, they may lose it a lot quicker. They're not as patient. And you can't really blame them because they're dealing with so much. And so that's where we have to make sure that we continue to support our teachers, provide the services. One thing that I recommend for everybody, including myself, we must have counseling and we must have therapy. That's going to be one of the most important things that we have to get through this pandemic. Counseling, therapy, talk to people. A lot of times we keep things to ourselves. So that's one thing that we're doing here also in Huntsville City Schools, is making sure that we're providing the necessary counseling, therapy for our teachers, for our students, and for all of our employees as we continue to try to close the gaps. Guys, there's a lot more I can say, but I'm going to go ahead and just be quiet right there. And if you have any questions, please ask me the questions.
Larissa, do we have any questions from there? Dr. Lombard, first of all, thank you for that conversation and that input. From a parent standpoint, working with teachers, it is a new relationship. So what are some of the things that parents can do that can help our educators deal with this new level of stress?
Yeah, let me say this. First of all, I want to give a shout out to all the parents, because the parents were teachers for us for months. You know, the parents did the unthinkable, the unbelievable. So the parents, they took the torch for the teachers, and they were teaching the little boys and girls their letters and their sounds. But I would encourage all parents to continue doing what they're doing as much as possible. Continue building the relationship and understanding what their students are doing, what their children are doing in school. Continue those relationships. We're reaching out to the counselors, the social workers, the principals, the teachers. When things seem to get back normal, don't just distance yourself. Don't go back to normal. Keep those positive relationships and make sure you pay attention to what's going on at the schools, and be a major part and a partner with those schools.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
How can we best introduce the narrative of counseling and therapy to communities who may have a stigma perspective towards those resources?
You can't hear it.
Sorry.
Come around. Hold on, she's gonna reread that question, Dr. Lombard.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that's okay.
My closest one.
Oh, you're gonna have to make that bigger. You know my eyes are bad, girl. Let me make it bigger.
You want me to read?
Yeah, here you go.
Yeah.
The question is regarding, you've mentioned therapy and counseling and training, and there's a stigma in certain communities that those things are bad or viewed negatively. How do you integrate or soften the blow as you try to introduce that into those communities?
You know, one thing I do as I talk about therapy, and it is taboo for many generations, and especially in certain communities. But I think that people like myself, people like Dr. McNeil, and the other people who are on this live, as we share our experiences and we show our willingness to receive therapy and counseling and talk about the wins that we get from therapy and counseling, I believe that people will be more likely to participate. It's too often, especially from a man point of view, I'm just going to be honest with you, from a man point of view and a father point of view, too often, we're expected to be tough and just handle things and take care of business. And that's probably the worst thing ever, guys, is if you're trying to handle everything on your own, you're probably not going to be successful. As parents, as mothers and fathers, sometimes we need a listening ear. We need that person that we can reach out to give us some suggestions, a different perspective on life. And as I tell my son all the time, I just told him this weekend, I've been down the road that you're going. So, hey, I am your therapist. I can help you. I can help you get through these different things. So I would just think that, I think it's how we package the word therapist, and I think how we publicize it. If it's put in a way that it looks bad, it's going to be bad. But if we package it in a way that it's going to be helpful and can benefit us, I think the perception of it will change.
And Jessica Cable saying transparency is key. I'll take Dr. McNeil's thoughts on new boundaries. And I think if we who have seen the benefits will educate people on the benefits and not the negativity, then we'll see it embraced more and utilized more in our communities. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not a problem. Dr. Lombardo, I was just listening to you talk about the learning gap with the kids from COVID. How is, I guess like you have to speak to Huntsville, but how are you all in Huntsville handling the teachers coming back and understanding that there's going to be a learning gap? And so that's one question. And then two, do you all see this affecting our educational system, over the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Because surely they can't go back into the schools and just pick up where they left off.
Wow, that's a loaded question. Let me say this, in Huntsville City Schools, and I'm pretty sure in Tuscaloosa as well, we are preparing for our boys and girls to come back to school. That's number one. We know that there's going to be a certain group who come back to school, and there's going to be a certain group who decide to stay virtual. But what we've done, as we are aligned with the state of Alabama, of course, we've received hundreds of thousands plus millions of dollars to deal with what we call unfinished learning. And so the unfinished learning, we have what you call a road to recovery plan. That's what everybody in the state of Alabama is doing now. In this road to recovery plan, it's going to deal with the learning loss, the learning gaps that we face as educators. So for example, we have to create an unfinished learning plan, a road to recovery plan to deal with our boys and girls who may not be proficient in reading, who may not be proficient in math. What does that mean? That includes hiring additional staff. That means hiring social workers, counselors. That means having a core reading program, a core math program. That means providing the professional development that our boys and girls may need as well. So we have this strategic plan in the Huntsville City Schools that we are using to prepare for our boys and girls return. So we had to submit our plan to the State Department. The plan was approved last week. So we already have a roadmap to cover all of those areas. In addition, one of the biggest things on the elementary level is that and this existed even before COVID. We have to make sure that our teachers are trained. Too often we used to tell teachers, hey, make sure you raise the proficiency rate for our boys and girls with reading and math. But they were never trained to teach reading. And I think that's one thing a lot of people forget. People think that just because you are a teacher, you automatically know how to teach reading, you know how to teach math. But many of us only had one reading class when we're in college. But when you come to the schoolhouse, it's totally different. They start talking about phonics, phonemic awareness. I'm like, what is that? What do you mean fluency? A lot of these things may not have been taught in college. But just to answer the question, the main thing is in state of Alabama, we have a road to recovery plan to deal with unfinished learning. And this is what we call our strategic plan to deal with our students coming back. What was that second part of the question? One more time.
Just the second part really quick was how long do you think, is it going to affect us 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, or will it be something that we can bridge the gap pretty quickly?
Well, I'm very optimistic and I'm very positive. I believe that all students can learn. I believe that we can bridge the gap, but I do want to be honest as well. I am worried, I am concerned because some students, number one, they were already a year or two behind. That's number one. And then the COVID gap came, it pushed them months behind again. And we're talking about, whether it's African-American students, EL students, special education students, they may have already had a gap as a subgroup, but then when COVID came, it pushed them further behind. In addition, when you look at students who are already proficient, if you look at the data, many of those students are maybe 2 months behind according to the data. So I think that when you look at the students who may be 2 months behind, I think we can close that gap quickly. I'm very concerned about the students who have a maybe 2 years behind. So again, I believe that we can do it. I believe it's going to take great leadership, having the right leaders in place and having the best training for our teachers. It cannot just be one PD. We have to have strategic, skillful training for our teachers, and we have to have refreshers so that they can make sure that they're providing effective instruction and close those gaps with our boys and girls.
Thanks, Dr. Lombardo, for your time. We'll now prepare to hear from our next speaker, Miss Lizzie Wells. Since her AP psychology class in high school, Lizzie has always had a fascination with human psychology and wanted to pursue a career that allowed her to combine this knowledge of human nature with meeting the practical needs of her community. This led to a bachelor's degree in psychology, minor in sociology from Stanford University, then later on a master of social work at the University of Alabama. Her passion for mental health and well-being for all ages, and she believes in that, and it is crucial to beginning to have these conversations with young children in school. She's a firm believer that every school needs a social worker. Go get them, Lizzie, who can serve as a link between school and community. She's employed by Tuscaloosa One Place at Family Resource Center and is contracted out through the county school system, working specifically at Advanced Elementary and Lakeview Elementary. Miss Lizzie Wells, take it away.
Good afternoon, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I will share my screen really quick, and then we can get started. Okay, so as my introduction said, that I am a school social worker in 2 elementary schools here in the county school system. One is Vance and the other one is Lakeview Elementary School. So today I'm going to be talking about how mental health matters, and yes, even in elementary schools. And we'll be talking about mental health, trauma, and social emotional learning from the perspective of an elementary school social worker. And this is a little shout out to my team of social workers that I get to work with every single day. Prior to the 2018-2019 school year, the county school system actually only had 3 social workers for our entire school district. And so a partnership began between Tuscaloosa One Place and the county board to employ 5 of us to come on as school social workers. And in just 3 years, we've seen our program grow from that to the 14 you see on the screen today, which has been really exciting to be a part of as we were going through it. And that's been with the support of the county commission and Tuscaloosa One Place. And this is a little bit of the data that we collect as a team. I won't go into reading all of it, but I just wanted to show that this is the kind of data we keep track of. That student contacts, parent contacts, home visits, agency referrals, crisis interventions, and DHR reports. And these are from the past 2 years. So what I find extremely interesting with this is that this is all pre-COVID. So as our last speaker was talking about with the new COVID gap, all of these stats have to do with issues we were facing before COVID. So I'm very interested to see what our data is going to look like this year with the addition of our new social workers, and then also all of the challenges that we have been dealing with this whole year with COVID. And so when we're talking about education, it is so important to look at the whole child, not just the student aspect. And unfortunately with that, we have to talk about childhood trauma. And so on the left, I have a little bit of statistics kind of talking about how prevalent childhood trauma is. 26% of children in the US witness or experience a traumatic event before they turn 4 years old. And 60% of adults say they experienced abuse or other traumatic family events in their own childhoods. And if it's that common, which I truly believe it is, and the research tells us it is, then we need to recognize the strong and significant correlation between trauma and low academic achievement. And there are several statistics I could sit here and go through on trauma and mental health, but there honestly isn't enough time. And I think even more impactful than that is realizing that for every number that's on this screen or the previous screen, each number represents a child and their family and their stories. And all of those complicated and heartbreaking details, none of that could be summed up into any quantitative data. So just as it is important to look at the brain science, which I'll talk about a little bit, statistics, it's also important to talk about individual stories as well. And so what does a school social worker do? Some people don't know, many people don't. One of my favorite questions to get asked is, what does a typical day look like for you? And I laugh because there is no typical day. But This is a little bit about what we do. We work with individual students, we do group work, we go into classes and teach social emotional lessons. We provide crisis intervention, whether that's helping a student regulate their behavior, which I'll talk about a little bit, but also suicide protocols, homicide protocols, DHR reports. And yes, I do far more suicide and homicide protocols, even into elementary schools, than many people could ever imagine. We serve and provide staff consults. We serve as a liaison between parents and guardians and school staff. And then we also provide referrals to community resources, whether that's therapy and family services, financial assistance, programs, and other community resources. And so when I mentioned before about self-regulation and co-regulation, when I'm talking about self-regulation, I'm talking about our ability to regulate our own emotion and our behaviors. And why this is so important to talk about is because we are not born knowing how to deal with our feelings of anger or sadness or stress. And many of the children in our schools today, they do not have an adult in their life to help teach and model these skills, and certainly not in healthy ways. And so that's a lot of what our roles, those of us who are in the schools, is to help teach them these skills, but to also walk through that process of co-regulation so that we're helping them work through it until they have gained the skills to be able to handle it themselves. And so I included a couple pictures of quotes that really stand out to me that I like to read over and over again. One is that self-regulation is a skill, so let's teach it. Kids are not born with it any more than they are born knowing how to tie their shoes. And the other one is when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs, which that is just a beautiful picture of what we're trying to do. So the bad news is that trauma is a fact and mental health issues are a fact, but the good news is so is resilience. And when we're talking about resiliency, we're talking about the ability to achieve positive outcomes mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually despite any adversity. And so as much as me or any of my colleagues would love to have a magic wand to wave and get rid of many of these issues children's and families are facing, unfortunately, we can't. So we can just do our part to connect them to resources to help ease the burden, and then also teach these skills so that they'll be able to better equip and handle anything that's going to get thrown their way later in life. And so when we talk about mental health, which I personally believe we do not talk about enough in our society, but when we do, 9 times out of 10, we're talking about adults and we leave kids behind. And if we're finally starting to realize that adults can get burned out and stressed out and lose their cool and snap, then we need to recognize that kids feel that same way too. The only difference is that we as adults hopefully have learned the skills through life experience and mentors to be able to handle those things. And again, many of these kids don't have that yet. So that's what our role is. And they're still facing those real adult problems that yet they're still learning and developing. And so we need to be able to address the social and emotional needs of students, because if we don't do that, they are not available to learn. And what I mean by that is how we talk about stressed brains cannot learn. A lot of times we hear the statement that if a student is hungry, they can't focus on their math or their reading, which is absolutely true. And that is why we need support to meet those physical needs. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But what I want to talk about is a little bit more of the brain science, because again, I'm a psychology major. I love learning about the brain, and I think it's important for kids to be able to start learning about it. And they're actually able to retain it a lot more than you would think. I go into my 3rd and 4th and 5th grade classes, and I teach them the parts of the brain and what's happening when they're stressing out, and they're able to retain it and talk to me about the parts of the brain. And so I'll do a quick little version of the demonstration I do with them. But what I do is I take a fist like this, and I tell kids to picture that this is their brain. And this is their brain when they're calm. And when they are calm, the prefrontal cortex, or their wise owl, that is what's in control. And this is when we're able to retain information, we're focused and ready to learn, and we are able to make those health and safe choices for ourselves. But we also have another part of our brain inside the amygdala, and we refer to that as a guard dog, so that the kids can understand it. And this is in charge of our emotions. And this is the part of the brain that perceives threats, whether they're real or they're not real. And so when our brain perceives a threat, whether that could be a car coming our way, which is a good thing, it automatically has us jump and move out of the way, and we don't have to think about it. But sometimes our brain can hear a tone of a voice or see kids fighting in the hallway or a loud noise, and it's perceiving it as a threat due to the trauma they've experienced in the past. And so their guard dog or their amygdala starts barking so loud that the wise owl, the prefrontal cortex, has flown away, and you're no longer able to make those healthy and safe decisions. You're no longer able to retain that information. So if kids are sitting in this survival state where their guard dog is going off throughout the day, they're not able to retain math. They're not able to retain reading. And so that puts even more of a gap between students who are experiencing trauma and those that are not. And they can't focus when they're thinking about, and I purposely left a blank there because, as you can imagine, boy, can we fill in the blank on a multitude of things about what these children might actually be thinking about. Just as kids come in with a backpack every single day, hopefully, they come in with an emotional backpack as well that they bring into the classrooms with them. And it's important to recognize that. And that's a little bit about what this slide is about. It's a checklist from a trauma training that I'm currently going through, and it breaks up all of the adverse childhood events that could take place in a kid's life. But what I like about it is it divides it up into 4 categories, whether that's home, school, personal, or social. And I'll just read through some of them, but I think they're important to kind of read out. But death of a family member, we've definitely experienced that with COVID and before. But domestic violence, abuse, neglect, separation or divorce, incarceration of a family member, neighborhood violence, robbery or theft, abuse of drugs or alcohol, illness, utilities being turned off, cutting or self-harm, eating disorders, suicidal ideation, intense sadness, intense hopelessness or anger, behavior problems, bullying, illness, conflicts, car accidents, witnessing violence. All of these things are things that we experience every day as a school social worker in the school setting. And even I have a social work intern that comes with me from the university. And about halfway through her placement, she had only been with me for about a month. And I remember her reading this list and being like, there's not one thing on this list we haven't dealt with in just a month of being here, which again is just a reminder of how common these issues are in our schools every single day. And that is the bad news. But the good news, again, is that school connectedness is the strongest factor in reducing incidents of anxiety, depression, suicide, substance abuse, and violence. And it's a protective factor for all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, and level of family income, which that is exciting news to me because where is the best place to impact these children? It's here at the schools. And so that is why I agree with what was said before, that we need more mental health professionals in the school settings. We need more social workers, more counselors, more staff, because it's so important. And you don't hear it from me. I want to read this quote that I read on Facebook one time. I don't remember who the original author was, but I remember reading it and it's standing out to me. And I have it framed in my office because I think it's so important. But it was a woman. I don't even remember her name, but sometimes she'd take me out of my 3rd grade class and we'd go to her office and just play with Play-Doh or dried beans. I don't even remember what we talked about, but she helped me find ways to control my anger, stop cussing in class, stop doing off the wall things, stuff like that. I think it was the first time someone ever really tried to help me. When I was a baby, my father got murdered. And sometimes you can't really talk to your family about nothing, because there are these sensitive spots and dark places, and maybe they're hurting too. So people just hold on to stuff, especially in this neighborhood, especially males. And that is just a really beautiful and hard quote to read, but I personally love to read it over and over again because it reminds me not only as my role and the impact that I could have on these children, even if they don't remember my name, even if they don't remember all the lessons that I learned, that maybe these skills that they're learning now they will use in the future, or if nothing else, how we talk about how common mental health issues are, and there's such a stigma that maybe someday they decide they need to seek out therapy, and that seems really intimidating and scary, and they just think like, oh, I remember there was this one woman I used to talk to in school and that wasn't so scary, and so they have more confidence going and seeking the help that they'll need, way down the line. And one more quote, because I love quotes. These are some notes that I got from my little kiddos in my schools. And I just wanted to read a little section of one where it says, I got to look up here, but you helped me get through all of my problems because you were there for me. You made me happy and you made me laugh. We played fun games together. You made me feel safe enough to tell you what was going on, and you wanted to help me. You even gave me an advice or a heads up. Because of you, you made me reach goals I never thought I could make. And I share that not to say there's anything particularly amazing that I did or some intervention that necessarily works, but it's once again a reminder that the research tells us that one of the most important indicators of educational success is having one trusted adult in your school setting that you feel like you can turn to. And as our previous speaker mentioned, we have teachers, we have coaches, we have counselors, and they do an amazing job. I have a younger sister who's a teacher. I work with amazing faculty every single day. But as he mentioned, there are so many demands with kids, with the pressure of standardized testing and meeting standards and bookmarks, that we can't all do it all on our own, and we need all hands on deck to be able to face these issues, especially going into this next year after this global pandemic with COVID. And so that is why I believe we really do need mental health professionals and social workers in all schools. Which brings me to my final slide. This was my favorite week of the school year this week. The first week of May, I was able to celebrate National Children's Mental Health Awareness Week in my schools, because May 7th was actually National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. And so that whole week, I was able to go into every 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade class in both of my 2 schools. And we talked about mental health. We talked about how to take care of themselves. And we were able just to have a really fun time together talking about real important things. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because I can't help but imagine how much better my generation would be and the generations before me would be if we grew up learning to pay attention to how we're feeling, the thoughts that we're thinking, how to take care of ourselves, and how to reach out for help if we're struggling. I think it would have made a world of difference for many of us. But unfortunately, we didn't have those conversations growing up. It's not that long ago that I was in schools myself. So I just think it's so important to talk about these things, even at a young age, to break the stigma, to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. And that way we can support our students and their families to build resiliency so that we have stronger schools and stronger communities altogether, which I think everyone can agree is the goal. And so, yeah, thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Miss Lizzie Wells, for that challenge. And I'm going to put a challenge back to you really quickly. You mentioned something we've heard a lot about: police needing to be taught mental health and mental de-escalation. You just pointed out something, and I'm going to challenge you to push that narrative. Should we be getting all of our teachers some form of mental, psychological coaching, teaching, training? Because as you were saying that, I'm going, oh my God, if we think it's important out there when there's a problem, how much more important would it be if we were doing it in the classroom? Not just the one person like you. What is it, 14 of you guys? How many students do you all have to cover in the county? Probably 10,000 or more, whatever the number is from start to finish. So you need some help.
Absolutely. And we would love the help. And honestly, I think the teachers would want to be trained, because they're facing these issues whether they're trained or not. So
right,
it's interrupting their class. So I mean, speaking for my sister and the teachers I work with, I know that they would be more than willing, because I remember talking to my sister, how he mentioned they maybe only take one class on reading. They maybe get one class on behavioral management, and they definitely don't get a whole class on mental health, yet they're facing those issues every single day. So absolutely, I think so.
Take your banner and run, Miss Wells. We'll be here to help you. Thank you so much. Thank you. At this time, we're going to turn it over to Bishop Kevin Benton Sr. Thank you for your service in our United States Army for over 20 years. During that time, he received his call into ministry and began preaching the gospel. He's pastored for several years in Germany and South Korea, and now he oversees Kingdom Fellowship Independent Ministries, where he serves as the overseer. This fellowship is an interdenominational nonprofit organization established for the purpose of modeling and mentoring church leaders in their ministry to pursue faith in a spirit of excellence. And he is going to talk with us about the importance of renewing the mind. Bishop Benton.
Bishop, you're muted. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. Hold on, Bishop, we can't hear you yet.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. All right. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. Let me say again, greetings, everyone. We certainly do appreciate the opportunity that we have to be with you here on the panel. I want to certainly thank Mr. Bill, Martin, Jackie, thank you all again for entrusting us with the time and the opportunity to just be able to come and share with this prestigious panel on today. I think each one who has come before me has done a marvelous job of providing us with the information that is certainly, I believe, going to be beneficial to educators that are there in the state of Alabama. So we're so grateful and we're thankful. My task today, might be wondering, why is a preacher on the panel today? And I kind of wondered that myself. And then I realized that my task is much like your task, that we all are educators. We all are educating the minds of individuals in one form or another. But I believe that the education that we are providing certainly is designed to make an impact on people's lives. So I want to take about the next 15 minutes or so and talk with you about the power of a renewed mind. And I wanted to ask you to do something that you probably don't get a chance to do too often. And it's that let's take these next 15 minutes and I'm going to ask you to think about you. Just think about you over the next 15 minutes. I know you probably don't get an opportunity to do that, whether you're at home or whether you're standing before your students in a classroom. Rarely do you and I get a chance to think about us. But I want to begin by sharing with you and encouraging you that if you don't take time to think about your own mental health, your own health, period, if you don't take time out to do that, then it's going to be very difficult for you and I to stand before a group of people and be able to have influence on them in such a way that it's going to make an impact in their lives. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to challenge you to really think about how essential what you do is to the lives of people. And I know maybe you kind of have that fleeting thought every now and then, but what you, and I'd like to believe that what I do, what we do has such an impact on the lives of people that I remember my 8th grade history teacher. I remember my 8th grade math teacher who probably didn't even know that I was paying attention to the life that they were providing and teaching me, because they were not just giving me reading, writing, and arithmetic, but they were teaching me life skills and didn't even realize it. And so I want you to remember that when you stand before people and share with them, the one thing that I think impressed me with our previous instructor who was providing the screen about the various different, the rock and things like that, I thought about the rock and the egg, because I realized that if there was one thing that life is after me and causing me to fail at, it is pressure to try to keep me and rob me from having a peace of mind, to rob me from having a peace of mind. If you and I as instructors, you and I are those who are called to be educators, if we don't have a peace of mind, so oftentimes I wonder, how in the world do you do what you do without peace of mind? How do you come home and be a parent? How do you go to work and be an educator? How do you live in society if you are robbed of that peace of mind? So I want to take a moment and share our screen with you so that you hopefully will get a better understanding of exactly what you and I are being challenged with on a daily basis. Can everyone see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And so when we think about it, of course, I'm coming from a biblical perspective. It's a spiritual perspective that the Apostle Paul, as he writes to the church at Rome, he wants them to understand that literally, if they're going to succeed in life, it will be because of the mindset that they have. If they're going to succeed in life in any capacity, it will be because they refuse to allow themselves to be defeated in their mind. They refuse to allow life's calamities to come against them in such a way that it impacts them negatively and they cannot function in the manner in which certainly God has provided for them. So he starts off by saying, I encourage you, I beseech you. He's literally pleading with them that they would present themselves on a daily basis to God in such a way that they realize that, God, I need you to do something for me on a daily basis. And Paul says, the encouraging thing is to not be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you as an individual can demonstrate that which is good and acceptable and what he considers to be the perfect will of God. So let me begin by saying really that renewing your mind, the concept of renewing your mind is not rebuilding your old mind. Every day, every time I get to stand before a group of people, stand before these parishioners that I've been blessed to serve, I have to realize that I cannot stand before them with the previous mindset that I had. Every day that I'm awakening, it seems like I have to put on a brand new mindset. I cannot bring the troubles from the previous day, the concerns or the issues from the previous day into this day. Every day, it seems like I have to make sure that I renew my mind so I don't bring issues in from my past to the table, that I don't bring issues from my past into the classroom or into what I call the congregation. But it's not about replacing or rebuilding, rather, your old mind. It literally is about replacing it. So I don't want you to think about the power of a renewed mind being, I need to renew my old mind. No, maybe we need to replace the old mindset that we've had. And so that when we stand before our students or stand before congregations, whatever our capacity may be, when we stand before people, we've got to stand before them with a renewed mind. Because I don't know about you, but I go through some things on a daily basis that I cannot afford to allow myself to have the mindset of bringing this kind of thought pattern, if you would, into the classroom or into our congregation. And so there's something that I think is quite interesting that the prophet Isaiah writes that it encourages me all of the time. And Isaiah says that God will do something special for you and I, that he will keep us, guard us, provide for us what he calls perfect peace if we keep our minds stayed, focused on him. And I think all of us need to kind of admit that I need a secret place where I can go to. I need either someone who I can go to. I need what the help that has been mentioned previously. I need to be able to go somewhere where I can find perfect peace. I can find a level of mature peace. Because if you're like me, there have been times when I want to give somebody a piece of my mind. But if I give them a piece of my mind, the last thing I want to do is give them my peace of mind. And all of us we face those times in our lives where we really feel like giving someone a piece of our mind. But if you give them your peace of mind, then you can imagine the state of mind that will leave you in. So you and I, we have to fight, particularly as educators and people who have influence. Can you imagine what really you and I do? That for any given period of time, your students, you have access to their precious minds. You and I have access to what I consider to be one of the greatest commodities on the planet, which is the mind of mankind. And they sit before you on a daily basis, and you have access to their mind. And I find it amazing for me that throughout a week, particularly on a Sunday, that I get an opportunity to impact the minds of adults. that I get an opportunity to say something to them that's going to have influence on them, perhaps for the rest of their lives. And so in order for me to do that, I've got to have a peace of mind. I cannot allow myself to have my personal life have an impact on me so that it impacts the way that I influence others. And so the prophet says that God will do something specific. He'll keep you in a perfect peace if you'll keep your mind stayed on him. Can I remind each one of us that you, whether you believe it or not, understand it or not, you are in a battle, a struggle on a daily basis just because you are a person of influence, just because you have access to other people and you have the opportunity to impact them and make them more influential in society. There's a battle and a struggle for the possession of your peace of mind. Negative forces in life are designed to cause you and I to find ourselves in positions where we feel like throwing up our hands and quitting, where we feel like throwing up our hands and throwing in the towel, because the negativity knows that you're about to make a positive impact on a bunch of students. Maybe you haven't looked down the road, or maybe some of you who have been teachers for quite some time, but you haven't looked down the road and realized that there's going to be students who'll come back to you years from now and tell you thank you for what you did. Thank you for how you influenced their lives. Thank you for how you made an impact in their lives. Some of them may never come back, but I guarantee you there'll be one or two that will appreciate what you're doing. And so always remember that when life comes at you in a negative way, it is designed to cause you to feel like, you know what, I don't have a peace of mind. And so always remember there's a struggle for your peace of mind. And when I think about peace of mind, I think about the fact that it really is the absence of stress and anxiety. And each one of you, I'm sure, know that the job that you have as an educator can be very stressful and filled with anxiety. So we do have to find ways. How do I deal with this anxiety? Martin, I'm sure you've kind of been there before. How do we deal with the stress that comes along with just this job? How do we deal with the anxiety that comes along with standing before people? And oftentimes you feel like, you know what, I'm teaching, I'm doing the best that I can, but it just doesn't feel like I'm making an impact on my students, just doesn't feel like I'm making an impact on people. And stress and anxiety can build up. And this is when I turn to one of my favorite scriptures. And I remember the Apostle Paul, as he says to the church, find a way where you can become victorious in your mind and don't worry or be overly anxious, is literally what he's saying, filled with anxiety. Don't worry about anything, but here is the key. In everything, through prayer, or through whatever method it is that you find comfort in terms of talking with someone, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And when I'm able to do that, the apostle ends by saying, the peace of God, which surpasses under all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. God has a way of protecting my peace of mind. He has a way of making sure that every day that I renew my mind and I stand before people to influence them with those few moments that he gives me, I do my very best to make sure that I stand before them bridle free of anxiety. Because if you and I allow ourselves to be overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with stress, when we stand before our students, when we stand before people, it certainly will be revealed. They will know it, you will know it. And so find ways that you can say to yourself, you know what, I've got to be able to get away and find an opportunity to relieve myself so I don't stand before people filled with stress and anxiety. Here are what I consider to be the results of a renewed mind. When my mind has been renewed, when I'm refreshed, when I know that I'm at a place where I'm at my best and I'm feeling good about what I'm doing in terms of me educating people and standing before people, here are the results that I've discovered. That a renewed mind is a made up mind. And so I've made it up in my mind that I'm not going to allow the negative forces, the challenges that I face on a daily basis, that I'm sure you face on a daily basis, that I've made it up in my mind that I'm not going to allow that to sway me from the importance and the value that I know each one of you bring to the classroom, that each one of you bring to your homes, that each one of you bring to the various capacities that you have in your life. And so the writer James, he has something interesting that I always try to live by. He reminds us that he calls it a double-minded man, or a man who has two minds, who functions in a dual mindset, one that is filled with doubt, one that is filled with fear, and then one that is filled with faith, one that is filled with an understanding that I can do this, that I was created to do this. Can I encourage you that I believe you realize that as a teacher, one of the reasons you chose that profession is because you know you were chosen to do this. You know that you were, I would use the word anointed to do this, that this is something that you were set in life to do. So how about you singularly keep that in your mind, that regardless to the challenges that come against me, this is what I am called to do. I can't let doubt creep in. I can't let fear creep in. I can't let anxiety creep in, because if I become this double-minded person, I will become unstable. This is where the anxiety comes in. This is where the stress comes in, and you become unstable in all of your ways, in your planning process, in your teaching process. All of that can be impacted when we allow ourselves to have a dual mindset, if you will, wondering whether or not I can do this, wondering whether or not that I make an impact. There are going to be students, I'm sure, that make you feel like you do not make an impact. But there's that quiet student, perhaps sitting in the back, may never say anything, but you're changing their lives, you're impacting their lives, and they may not ever show it or say it while they're in the classroom. But you've got to know that that is exactly what you have been called to do. What I love about a renewed mind is that a renewed mind is a powerful mind. It's a powerful mind as well as a powerful mind. A renewed mind is a mind that understands that I have a certain level of authority, not just authority given to me because I'm the instructor, the teacher, I'm the educator, or in my case, I'm the preacher, but because of the authority that I know that I have based on who I am, particularly in the realm in which you are teaching. My mind helps me to understand that I walk in a certain level of authority, and that my students reverence and respect the authority that you have. They reverence and respect, and none of us should abuse that authority. None of us should misuse that authority. None of us should ever forget that the authority that we have been given is a marvelous thing, because it helps the students to find themselves being able to be submitted to you and I. It's the same thing in the concept of Christ, that we use it from a spiritual perspective. And this is why the writer admonishes us to let this mind be in us that was also in Christ Jesus. Regardless of the challenges that came Jesus's way, he always had a mindset to believe that he was more than a conqueror, that he was called to be the instructor, if you would, of his day, that as he stood before thousands and ministered to them, that he transformed and he changed their lives. Even though he had a pending cross that was before him, he never allowed any of that to stop him from what he knew that he was called to do, which is to impact and change people's lives. And so I want to really encourage you to remember that the results really are a renewed mind is a victorious mind. That I see myself, and I hope that you all see yourselves as educators, to always realize that you should walk in a victorious mindset every day that you stand before those students. They're not just listening to you, but they're watching your demeanor. They're watching how you carry yourself. They're watching how you present yourself. And so I've made it up in my mind that I'm persuaded that neither life nor death, angels, principalities, all of these, what might be considered spiritual aspects, have a natural effect on us as well. But I'm persuaded that I can do this. I can impact people's lives. I can stand before them and have a renewed mindset that says what I'm doing is making a difference. What I'm doing is certainly impacting and influencing the lives of the people and the minds of the people who sit before me. And so I'd like for you to take these keys with you as I prepare to close on today, and remembering that when it comes to this renewed mind, the writer started off at the beginning by admonishing us to remember and to realize that here is key number one: be not conformed. Don't allow yourself to be shaped or molded by the lifestyle of the secular world that we find ourselves in. You are a gifted individual, and you have particular skills that I believe that are given specifically for you. And that ability is what you should walk in. Don't allow yourself to be conformed by external things, but allow yourself to realize that what I'm doing is certainly making an impact on the lives of the people that I'm in charge of and that I'm standing before. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed. Every morning, I see myself going through a transformation. Every time I stand before my parishioners, I see myself going through a transformation, this metamorphosis where I'm no longer thinking about things from my perspective, but I'm realizing that, you know what? I'm about to be someone's teacher. I'm about to be someone's pastor. I'm about to be someone's leader, someone's instructor. And I turn myself into that particular entity specifically for that person. Go through that transformation process. I guarantee you it will help you. And then really understand that every day I've got to renew my mind, not revitalize the old mind that I had, but every day come before your students every time you get an opportunity with a brand new mindset, with a fresh new mindset. And I think if we do this, if you do this, that we will realize that, you know what we're doing is making an impact. What we're doing is certainly having great influence on people. And the people who I'm influencing are going to sooner or later become adults, and they're going to turn and have the same impact on society that you had. And so never think that your job is not making an impact. You're influencing society as a whole, and I believe it's going to make a difference in people's lives. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve again on today. And I want to turn it back, unless there are any questions, I want to turn it back into the hands of Jackie and Martin.
All right. Thank you so much, Bishop Benton. What a great way to end the teaching part of the conference. And I want to thank all of you all for staying on. We went a little bit longer today, but we did have a slight interruption that added a few minutes to the
I was praying, man.
Earlier on, and as Mr. McNeil handled it well. What a trooper. Thank you all four of you knocked it out of the park, addressed different angles and aspects. And I want to say in closing, thank you to each one of you individually and collectively. And one of the things I was going to point out, Bishop, but you already pointed out, was it's okay, educators, to put yourself first in sense of taking care of yourself in order to take care of others. If you're not healthy, you're not well, then what you give out is going to be garbage. So, and I think Bishop took care of that pretty well. So I don't have anything else to say. I'll just let Bishop Wells, our CEO Bill Wells, just close us out and then turn it over to Dan.
I think each time we do these, they get better and better, and I'm just so proud of the presenters, but then also Jackie and Martin and the team behind them, Marissa, Dantrell, that do all the work trying to get us ready to really present something that's very important to our community. And we just really appreciate you attending today. And thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Martin, for leading us in this effort.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to personally thank each and every one of you that have stayed on. Again, we apologize for taking a little 5 minutes of your time. But the devil's busy and he thought he had us at the beginning. But we are more than conquerors. So I appreciate all of you. I thank all of our speakers. You all were amazing. I wish we could have had 200 people on this call, because this is the topic that we need to talk about more and more. And so I challenge you all to go out and, share this topic of mental health, mental illness, as a whole, not just for educators, but for everyone, because we've learned today that we all are affected in some way. So again, I appreciate you all. We'll give you back your day. And if you would like, we'll probably email out the presentation and the recording as well. Thank you all again and have an amazing day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.